I never believed in haunted objects, ghost stories, curses, whispers in the night. They were just myths, exaggerated tales meant to entertain or scare children. At least, that's what I thought until I found the painting. It was in a dusty little antique shop on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and forgotten memories. I hadn't even planned to go in, but a sudden downpour forced me to take shelter. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with clouded eyes, barely acknowledged my presence as I wandered through the cluttered aisles. Then I saw it. The painting was propped against the far wall, partially hidden behind a stack of faded books. It wasn't particularly large, but something about it immediately drew me in. The frame was ornate, golden, but tarnished, its edges carved with swirling patterns that almost seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The image itself was unsettling, an old manor house under a stormy sky, its windows dark and empty. But it was the figure in the foreground that sent a chill down my spine. A woman, dressed in a tattered black gown, stood near the house's front gate. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, her features sharp yet oddly blurred, as if the artist had painted her with shaking hands. Her eyes, God, her eyes, were the worst part. They were wide, too wide, filled with something that felt disturbingly real. A mixture of sorrow and something else. Something watching. I stepped closer, my fingers tingling as I reached out to touch the frame. "She calls to you, doesn't she?" The voice startled me. I turned to see the shopkeeper standing uncomfortably close, his cloudy eyes fixed on the painting. "What?" I forced a laugh, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. "She calls to those who listen," he murmured. "That painting, it doesn't belong here." I frowned. "Then why are you selling it?" He sighed, running a hand over his stubbled chin. "I'm not. It always comes back." I stared at him, waiting for him to elaborate, but he only shook his head. I should have walked away right then. I should have ignored the strange feeling in my gut, thanked him for the shelter, and left. But I didn't. Instead, I bought it. It wasn't expensive, almost as if the man wanted to get rid of it. He didn't wrap it up for me, didn't even look at me as he handed me the receipt. As I carried the painting to my car, I had the strangest sensation that the woman's eyes were following me. By the time I got home, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and glistening under the glow of the street lights. My apartment was small but cozy, filled with shelves of books and half-finished sketches. I leaned the painting against the wall in my living room, telling myself I'd find a proper place for it later. That night, I had the first dream. I was standing in the middle of a vast empty field, the air thick with the smell of damp earth. In the distance, I could see the manor from the painting, its windows hollow and black. The woman stood in front of it, her head tilted slightly, as if listening. Then she turned to face me. Her mouth moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. I tried to step closer, but my legs felt heavy, as if the ground itself was pulling me down. The whispering grew louder, urgent, filling my head with 1,000 voices speaking all at once. I woke up gasping. The apartment was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My skin was clammy, my heart beat too fast. I rubbed my face, shaking off the remnants of the nightmare. It was just a dream, I told myself, nothing more. Then, from the corner of the room, I heard it. A whisper, software, lingering, coming from the direction of the painting. I didn't sleep much after that first night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel something watching me, something just beyond the edges of my vision. It wasn't paranoia. I knew what I had heard. A whisper, faint but deliberate. But I had no explanation for it. And that was the worst part. The next evening, I sat on my couch, staring at the painting. The woman in the black gown seemed different, though I couldn't say how. Her posture? The angle of her head? Or maybe it was just my imagination. I grabbed my phone and searched for any information on the painting, hoping to find its origins. Nothing. No artist name, no historical records, nothing even remotely similar online. It was as if the painting didn't exist. The whispering started again that night. I was lying in bed when I heard it, soft, almost melodic, like someone murmuring just outside my door. My breath caught in my throat. I stayed completely still, listening. It wasn't the wind, nor was it coming from outside. It was inside. The sound grew clearer. Words, but not in any language I recognized. My heart pounded against my ribs as I forced myself to move, to sit up, to turn on the light. The whispering stopped instantly, as if it had never been there. I sat awake until sunrise. By the third night, I was exhausted but determined to figure out what was happening. I set up my phone to record while I slept, propping it on my nightstand. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was dreaming with my eyes open. But when I checked the recording in the morning, my blood ran cold. The video was silent at first, just the faint rustling of my sheets as I shifted in my sleep. Then, at exactly 3:14 a.m., the whispering began. It was low at first, almost too soft to hear. Then it grew louder, the words tumbling over each other in a frantic, urgent hiss. And then, my bedroom door creaked open, not fast, slowly, as if something was pushing it, inch by inch. I knew I had locked it. I always locked it. My sleeping self didn't react. The whispering continued, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the door stopped moving. The room was silent again. I rewound the video, staring at the frame where my door opened. There was no shadow, no movement beyond the door, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. I turned to look at the painting. This time, I was sure it had changed. The woman's head, once tilted in vague curiosity, was now slightly turned toward me. The difference was subtle, barely noticeable, but her gaze, it was no longer just eerie. It was knowing. That night I did something I never thought I would do. I covered the painting with a blanket. It was stupid, childish even, but I couldn't stand the way it watched me. I told myself I would take it back to the shop the next morning, demand a refund, and be done with it. But the next morning, the blanket was on the floor. The painting was uncovered exactly as I had left it. And the woman in black? She was closer. I wanted to get rid of it. I needed to get rid of it. The moment I saw the woman in the painting had moved undeniably closer than before. I felt something inside me snap. This wasn't just paranoia. This wasn't just exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. Something was wrong with that painting, and it wasn't going to stop. I grabbed it, shoving it into the hallway closet, slamming the door shut. I didn't care what the shopkeeper had said about it, always coming back. I'd take it back to the store, leave it on his doorstep if I had to. But that night, the whispering returned. It started earlier this time, just after midnight, but it wasn't coming from the living room. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the closet. The door rattled softly at first, then with more force, as if someone, Something was inside, pressing against it, trying to get out. I sat frozen in my bed, gripping my sheets so tightly. My knuckles turned white. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something. But my body refused. I could only watch as the closet door shuddered, the handle twisting slightly, not enough to open, just enough to show me that it could. Then silence. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I kept my eyes locked on that door until the first rays of morning seeped through my curtains. And as soon as daylight came, I forced myself to move. I grabbed the painting, wrapped it in a thick sheet, and drove back to the antique shop. But the store was closed. Not just closed, abandoned. The windows were boarded up, the open sign missing. The paint on the door was peeling, the wood rotting, as if no one had stepped inside for years. I banged on the door anyway. I rang a bell that no longer worked. I stood there, gripping the cursed thing in my hands. My pulse pounding so hard, I thought I might collapse. There was no answer, no shop, no old man, nothing. I turned back to my car, breathing heavily, my mind racing. I could throw it away, I thought. Leave it on the curb, burn it, bury it, something, anything. But as I walked toward my car, I caught my reflection in the side mirror. And I wasn't alone. She was there, standing right behind me. The woman from the painting. Close enough to touch. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. Just an empty street, but I knew what I had seen. I knew she was there, and worse, I knew she wasn't going to leave. I couldn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't be anywhere near that thing. So I drove. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get as far away as possible. But no matter how fast I drove, how far I went, the whispering followed. It was inside the car, inside my head, calling my name. You said, I don't remember much of that drive. My mind was a blur of fear and exhaustion, the whispering growing louder, filling every corner of my head. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly. My fingers ached, my only focus on getting as far away as possible. But the further I drove, the more I realized something was wrong. The road stretched endlessly before me, unfamiliar and winding, even though I had taken this route before. The streetlights were dim, flickering like dying candles. There were no other cars, no houses, no signs, just darkness pressing in from all sides. Then the whispering stopped. The sudden silence was even worse. My ears rang with the absence of it. My breath shaky as I forced myself to glance at the rearview mirror. She was there, sitting in the back seat, the woman from the painting. Her black gown blended into the shadows, her pale face expressionless, eyes locked onto mine through the mirror. My body froze, every muscle locking in place, my foot trembling on the gas pedal. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I couldn't. Then she moved. Her lips parted, and the whispering returned, only this time it was clear. Let me in. The car veered violently as I lost control, the tires screeching against the pavement. I slammed the brakes, skidding onto the side of the road, my chest heaving as I threw open the door and stumbled out. Cold air hit my face, but I didn't care. I backed away from the car, my entire body shaking. The whispering had stopped again, but I knew she was still there. The back door creaked open. I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going. There was nowhere to go. The road stretched into darkness, endless and empty. But I couldn't stay. I couldn't turn back. Then I saw it. A house. Not my apartment. Not a familiar landmark. But a house, standing alone at the end of the road, its windows dark, its front door slightly open. It was the only thing in sight. I had no choice. I ran inside, slamming the door behind me, gasping for breath. My hands fumbled for a lock, a chain, anything. But the door had none. Just an empty frame leading into a house that smelled of dust and something rotten. I turned, my eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The furniture was covered in white sheets, the air thick with age. The whispering had stopped again, but I could feel her. She was near. Then my eyes landed on the far wall. A painting hung there. The same painting, the same woman in black. Only now. She was smiling. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. But this wasn't possible. I had left it in the car. I had tried to get rid of it. I spun around to leave. The door was gone, not closed, gone. Only a blank wall remained where the entrance had been. A shiver crawled down my spine as I turned back to the painting. My own reflection stared back at me in the glass. Not my reflection. She was standing behind me, closer than ever. I felt cold fingers brush against my shoulder. Then, darkness. The next time I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the house. I was inside the painting.